I mean, you want to fight with somebody, you fight with me.
I respect that. I tell it like it is.
Joe Catenacci.
24 minutes in front of the hour as we round out our show here this morning from the Consumer Choice Center. Yaël Ossowski joins us now once a week. Weekly, we get to hear his insights and perspectives on some of the topics of the day. And since he's so well-traveled, we often lend to his expertise on things we can't find in our own American media as it relates to, policies and the implementation of those policies around the world, and just kind of the way in which Americans are operating and how citizens in countries all across the globe are responding to similar type of push by candidates and officials here in our own country. And with the president in Europe just a couple of weeks ago, and of course in my mind the media working tirelessly to blind the American people as to what goes on around the globe, over the last few weeks we have seen several nations placing anti-establishment type groups and officials in power, many of which advocate for strict immigration policies. So this is the conversation that we're going to have with Yaël this morning. Yaël, it's great to have you. Good morning. Hope you're doing well. Did you get yourself some avocado toast with your Starbucks shot this morning?
I didn't get any avocado toast, but I did get a nice croissant, Joe, so I'm ready to go on.
All right, you've got the croissant. I know you spend a lot of time in Europe, and avocados, heaven forbid we levy a tariff on Mexico. You may be paying more for that avocado toast at Starbucks. Just want to make sure you can afford it, given all the work you do. And with that being said...
Don't worry. That was a big part of the messaging against any kind of tariffs. Protect my avocado toast.
And in fact, yesterday I was at the grocery store, and yes, in fact, I bought avocados from Mexico. Yaël is with us here this morning. All right, lay it out for us. Now, over the course of the last couple of decade or so, we have seen Scandinavian countries, Sweden being one of them, and other countries in Europe take in a massive surge of migrants from the Middle East, from Africa, and over the course of time, it has reshaped many neighborhoods, many cities in these countries. And those natural-born citizens of the countries are now kind of stepping up and electing officials, similarly to what we've seen here in America with the rise of President Donald Trump right now. Is that kind of the way we've seen it? Well, we have. Just explain to us, I guess, how that whole dynamic has taken shape.
Yeah, if we go back to the beginning of the refugee crisis in Europe, there we had German sentiment that was very high towards letting people in. So as your listeners may know, there have been decades of wars in the Middle East. There's been a lot of economic issues in particularly African countries. A lot of people have been wanting to get out. So there are very legitimate refugees who've escaped war and bombings. Places like Syria have just been demolished, and many people were seeking to find a better life in many of the northern countries in Europe. Europe has very stable countries. There's very stable currency. These are typically peaceful countries, so obviously they're very idealistic for a lot of people who are escaping war and famine and poverty. So what happened in around 2010, 2011 is we started to have a huge influx of these migrants from North Africa, from the Middle East, trying to get into Europe. And at first the reaction was very tepid from many governments. They weren't quite sure what to make of it, and then they just started issuing all of the established laws. And by allowing people into, let's say, Greece asks them, where do you want to go? They say Germany, and they say, fine, make your way to Germany. And you just had entire huge caravans, sorry to use that word, but caravans of people who were trudging north, going through Austria, Hungary, trying to get to Germany, and then eventually Sweden, Denmark, and these countries. And what you started to see is that in Germany, the sentiment was very in favor at the time. Germany has, as many people know, a very sad history, one in which they've been criticized for a long time. Any of your listeners remember that from high school and reading through the textbooks. So there was a very open, liberal way of looking at whether or not we should accept these refugees. And it went very well. Germany accepted 1 million new refugees at the time. And after a while, once people started to try to integrate and people started seeing the effect of bringing these people in, there was pushback. And pushbacks really by this were fueled by the rise of political parties at the time. In Germany, it's the Alternative für Deutschland, the AfD. So they formed as a party initially against the European Union and the euro, but then found immigration and refugees as their big cause. So then you started seeing the rise in Austria, you started seeing the rise in Hungary and Italy. And really the entire notion was that we can't accept these people, it's too much, they're not willing to integrate, it's putting way too much of a strain on our system and our resources, so we need a way to stop that. So that really caused the rise of many of these parties. Many of these parties, particularly in France or in Italy, were very fringe, very small. In France, it was the Front National, led by Marine Le Pen, and she actually went in the presidential round all the way to the very end against Emmanuel Macron and almost won. Wasn't that close in the end, but still it represented that people in the French countryside were not happy with immigration policies. So this is the kind of thing that has been happening across the European Union. The issues that are brought up mostly have to do with the cause of the refugee crisis. And now we don't have as many refugees who are trying to get in. Things are getting better in some of these countries. And really the best antidote to the refugee crisis is actually better, stable systems in these home countries. Less war, less issues with governments that you can't trust, and really more economic growth. So the more you can have that in these other countries, the less refugees you're going to have and the less problems you'll have with domestic populations. So that's been kind of the rise. Some places they've been very successful, like in Italy. Italy is now a government that is a coalition between the Five Star Movement, which is more of a populist left wing, and then the Lega Nord, which is a more populist right wing. So now they control the government in a coalition, very much against what is happening with refugees and immigrants on the whole, but also very much against the monetary politics of the European Union. So that's, if you want to look at populism in this umbrella, we have obviously immigration, looking at jobs, integration, but then there's also money, the European Union, the euro, and then you have jobs. And it's that latter part, this kind of anti-globalist message that really resonated amongst the Donald Trump supporters here in the U.S. And I think that's where you're going to see a bit more movement. If we don't have significant reform and if we don't address things in the right way, we could have more populist movements around Europe and around the world.
Well, let's talk about other places around the world. In addition to Europe, Yaël Ossowski with us from the Consumer Choice Center. Not only in Europe, we've seen places in Australia, India. We've seen even in South America the election of a populist from in Brazil. Are the issues different in those countries or in the continent of Australia in that matter? Are the issues there a bit different or are they very similar in nature?
I think when it comes to Australia, they've obviously had a huge influx of immigrants in the past 30 to 40 years from Asian countries. And if you've ever been to Australia, you go to Melbourne or you go to Sydney, there's just a huge amount of different, Chinese or Japanese or Thai or Malaysian restaurants, big influx. And most of these people tend to be very entrepreneurial. So it's not necessarily the same as in some of the European cases, but there has been a lot of immigration. Australia is a very liberal country. They're in the G20. It's a place that has relatively free markets, has stable currencies. It's a very attractive place for people to move to and set up businesses. The populist movement there is mostly focused on immigration and integration. So there it's the One Nation Party. It's really just only been led by one woman thus far, but they've made some gains in some lower senates and state houses if we were to make a comparison with the U.S. system. So there is some gain. What we do see there is the Liberal Party, which is actually the conservatives. They actually just won a new election based mostly on the carbon tax. So yes, there is this populist movement on immigration, but more what we're seeing in Australia is this pushback against the more globalist sort of UN, we need carbon taxes movement. And that's really what's fueled the recent pushes in Australia. So we're not seeing as much of a rise there. It's really a center-right sort of ideological meshing that's kind of pushing Australia right now. If you compare it to a place like Brazil, what we had was a totally anti-establishment run. And we have a president there who's totally committed to dismantling the administrative state. they actually have something that many of us see with envy in the U.S. and in Europe. They have a department that's dedicated to de-administration. The idea is to cut as much waste in government as possible. So they have an entire government body that's dedicated to finding which laws shouldn't exist anymore, which government agencies we need to shut down. There's a huge push there. But at the same time, it is fiery populist rhetoric. It's a lot about rising up against the establishment parties. So there, it's this kind of back and forth. I think the best thing that we can kind of hope for is to have these kind of populist movements. I think they're important to have in a political system, but be able to taper them off at the extremes. We want to be able to ensure that we have good markets, that we have good institutions, and that people can know they can rely on their government and things aren't arbitrary. That's why the U.S. Constitution is still one of the best documents today in existence. And I think that's the best way that we can keep good balance of power between many of these institutions. So a lot of positive movements around the world. Hopefully we can do that a little bit more in the U.S., but hopefully that's a good overview between Australia and Brazil for now.
Yaël Ossowski with the Consumer Choice Center. All right, let's bring it back home. And, a lot of the conversation, of course, on the rise of the populist Donald Trump, of course, has been his stance surrounding illegal immigration and the government state that has kind of, muddied the waters with so much administrative, mumbo jumbo that the legal immigration system has suffered because of it. And I think, by and large, that's where the conversation kind of gets completely muddied in that, the rise of this populist type of president has been based on his stance towards reforming the system as a whole and not maybe necessarily just an anti-immigrant sentiment as you may see, maybe elsewhere. Would you agree with that assessment?
I think so. And, I'll reveal to your listeners, I am myself an immigrant. I moved from Canada when I was very young. I had a green card for a long time and became an American citizen in 2009. So I'm very familiar with the immigration system. It's very difficult. But then again, the U.S. has one of the most liberal immigration systems in the world. This is a country that really reveres entrepreneurship. It loves the idea that people want to come here and make a better life and contribute to the American dream. So there has been this confounding between legal immigration and illegal immigration. I've worked with a lot of undocumented workers throughout my career. A lot of people who work at restaurants are very familiar with this, and Home Depot, many of these industries, construction workers and the like. There's this parallel economy that has existed, and this doesn't really benefit anyone. It does benefit a lot of large corporations that need this labor, particularly on farms and things, and that's what I think Donald Trump tapped into whenever he discussed illegal immigration in the past. So on the behalf of the liberal activists, obviously they all have their hearts in the right place. They're all well-intended, but confounding legal immigration with illegal immigration is just very problematic. No one is discussing that we have a race-based system, but that is kind of what's brought up in the rhetoric of some of the left-leaning groups. And this is just a tale of the new American way of looking at this. This has been part of our foundings from the very beginning. Before the Civil War, you had the Know Nothing Party. This was a party dedicated to keeping Catholics out of America. And it was a populist movement that really tried to make it so that Irish immigrants and Italian immigrants couldn't find work and they'd be discriminated against. We don't really have that nowadays. We have this more economic, migratory restrictions that we've put up. We do need a streamlined immigration system. The problem is that the left and the right don't really view it in the same way, and they put priorities on different aspects. So until this is really fixed, President Trump's supporters are going to dig in their heels, and those on the left are going to do the same thing. So there's got to be an appreciation for legal migrants and legal immigrants who actually commit less crimes, who actually bring more than they take from our system, and really help create jobs, businesses, and all the things that we love. So there's so much good that can be done there. The issue is that illegal immigration, and I think the number is something between 11 and 13 million illegal immigrants who are estimated in the country. Let's figure out a way that we can integrate these people. Let's not make it so that these people constantly have to live in the shadows, because that doesn't make anything better. It doesn't increase the situation for jobs for Americans. And really finding the solution for that is probably the best way forward.
Yaël Ossowski from the Consumer Choice Center. Again, this is perspective and insight that I say it every time you join us, that you get nowhere else. And the in-depth conversation that you can compare things around the world to what we're seeing here in this country. And then also, as you just did, give us kind of a history of our own country and the way in which how this differs than maybe the way things worked many years ago here in our country as it relates to maybe my ancestors immigrating here from Italy back in the early 1900s. Good conversation as always, Yaël. I look forward to scheduling you again this upcoming week. I'm going to have to think of another good topic to pique the interest of the listeners out there because you provide such great insight, and we thank you so much for it.
Thank you so much, Joe. I'm going to get back to my espresso. Have a good week.
I'll butter that avocado toast for you, and we'll enjoy it. Yaël Ossowski spending most of his time now out in the Charlotte area, and we appreciate his feedback out of the Consumer Choice Center. Really, a great perspective on what is going on around the world as it compares to America, and how in which even American immigration laws and rules worked, and people who were hell-bent on keeping people who practice religion like I did growing up, keeping us out of the country, and then how that all transpired. Yeah, we built your bridges, tunnels, and every major city in the country, these evil Italian Americans. All right, we're 8 minutes in front of the hour. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to have a quick one to return.